100%. Trevor Hoffman. I learned a lot from him just about how he worked. I mean, he amazed me, really. I know a lot of people talk about my dad and his work ethic, but it was just hitting the baseball. I mean, my dad put a lot of work in it, but, you know, Trevor being a pitcher and how much running is involved with pitching, he found a way to make it fun. I mean, I know you guys have all heard the story of him being in his scrubs and out on the warning track out there, but he allowed me to participate. That's really how I learned how to catch a football, was playing with him and you know, doing his workouts with him. Ricky Henderson's another guy who I felt helped me as far as base running is concerned. Steve Finley is another guy I learned a lot from, just watching the routes he took in the outfield. Aside from Padres, Jimmy Rollins is a guy who comes to mind. I got to meet him on my dad's last All-Star game. He was a rookie. And then fast forward 12 years later, I'm playing with him on the same team. So there are a lot of guys. I was so blessed that not only when my dad played, his teammates were willing to lend a helping hand. I don't want to forget Davey Lopes too. I mean, that guy would hit me ground balls for literally hours upon hours. Even when I didn't want to take ground balls, he would
get out there, kid.
Ground balls for hours and hours. So, you know, there are so many guys. I could honestly sit here for 45 minutes and tell you about guys who had some type of impact on my career and helped me get there.
Well, and I think you were bringing up Ricky Henderson. I had the honor once of interviewing your father on this stage, and it's a moment I'll always remember. And he gave us one of his favorite Ricky Henderson stories. And I was just wondering if you could share one of your Ricky being Ricky stories.
I mean, you guys have probably heard all the same exact ones that I've heard.
But we love hearing them.
I guess one of my favorites is the John Olerud story. I don't know if you guys have heard that.
Please.
I don't know if you guys remember John Olerud. He was the one guy who used to have the helmet on when he played defense. And so the story goes, Ricky, I think he gets traded to New York, and he walks in and he says something to the extent of, I used to play with a guy who had a helmet just like that. And John goes, that was me when we were in Toronto. My dad would cackle at that story over and over and over again, no matter how many times he heard it. It's one of his favorites.
Oh yeah, that is a favorite. Yeah, we have one here.
Who was your favorite coach in the league?
That's a good question. Honestly, it's a tie between Bud Black and Don Mattingly. I felt like both of those two guys, and the one thing that a player really wants to have as for a coach is somebody who didn't forget how difficult the game can be at times. So when you're in the worst of your worst ruts, they haven't forgotten that at some point that they were there too. You have a lot of respect for the guys like that, and I think you know, Buddy stands out because he had such charm to how he could relay a message to players, whether it be him going hard on a guy or him, you know, trying to take it easy. He was very good at getting his message across without turning off a player.
It's very important.
Yeah.
Okay, last question.
I could really do this all day. We could stay here longer.
We all could. Yeah, you're a busy man, though.
Your dad was one of the first guys we heard about watching film on pitchers. Did you, A, watch film with him, and what was his demeanor like when he watched film?
That's a really good question, actually. Yes, I watched film with him almost every night, unless it was a late game and I couldn't stay up long enough. His demeanor was very similar to what it was when he was actually in the game. There was like a time, so my dad would get to the yard at like 1 o'clock, and he was generally himself until about 6 o'clock, and then all of a sudden that switch would go on and he'd be really serious, to the point where I'd be like, did I do something wrong? Are you mad? And as I got to go to the field with him more and more, I started recognizing, oh, it's 6 o'clock, he's turning into this guy, okay, he's locking into the game. And he'd come out of that after the game, and it was almost as soon as the tape got in there, he'd be back in it for the 30, 35 minutes it took for him to take it off one tape, put it on another. I think he just enjoyed. I think he enjoyed that process of. I mean, he'd have the game tape, he'd have the at bat tape, and he'd have the actual hit tape, and he'd go one by one, taking one off the other, putting it on the other, and he'd have just stacks of tapes. And when that pitcher came around, and maybe he wanted to, see how the guy pitched him the last time, he'd just flip it in there and he'd watch.
So you probably had a pretty good Blockbuster membership then.
You know what? He probably had a lifetime membership with Sony. I think he put them on the map, honestly, because he had so much Sony stuff just from. I mean, you guys remember? I mean, some of the parents remember VHS and Beta 8 tapes. He had all those bad boys. So he was pretty special when it came to his homework, so to speak.
I'm sure it's very zen for him too. Very just like meditative to.
I can imagine. I wasn't nearly as good hitting the ball, and I know how mentally draining the game was for me. And I can only imagine doing it at that level, and then coming home and having to do that. He probably did get into some type of zen-like.
Well, sadly, we are out of time, and I could do this all day too. But you're a busy man, and we want to make